What's happening in the Caribbean right now is the most shocking geopolitical collapse I've witnessed in my 30-year career as an economist. America deployed its largest military force to Latin America since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The result? Maduro was sworn in for a third term and Washington lost control. Let me tell you something. This story isn't just about Venezuela. This is the operational manual for the decline of an empire. And right now, this manual is being written, published, and distributed to the world in real time. The force America has deployed to the Caribbean since August. These numbers will make your head spin. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, 10 guided missile destroyers, nuclear submarine, F-35 fighters stationed in Puerto Rico, a total of 16,000 personnel just 7 miles from Venezuelan territorial waters. This is the largest American naval concentration in the Caribbean since 1962, and the result, Maduro is still in power. American hegemony has collapsed. But the real story starts here. This isn't just a failed coup. These are the birth pangs of a new world order, and the real heroes and villains in this story I'm about to tell you are very different from what you might expect. When I learned how Venezuela managed to survive, I couldn't believe it at first. The economic warfare was so intense, it wiped out 99% of government revenues. This data from the UN Special Reporter shows the most violent economic blockade in history. So how did Venezuela survive? First adaptation mechanism, dollarization. The country sacrificed monetary sovereignty but imported price stability. Second mechanism, this really surprised me. This small Caribbean nation built an alternative economic network with China, Russia, and Iran. China is now Venezuela's largest oil buyer. Russian trade increased 64% in 2024. The third mechanism is perhaps the most interesting. Sanctions inadvertently strengthened criminal networks. Illegal gold mining, oil smuggling, these created alternative revenue streams that bypass the state. America wrote Venezuela's survival manual with its own sanctions. But here's what's truly shocking. This isn't just a Latin American story. This is proof that global power balances have shifted. Do you know the Monroe Doctrine? For over a century, the Western Hemisphere was America's sphere of influence. The rules were simple. Defy Washington and you're gone. Venezuela broke this rule. The largest military deployment in history. Sanctions that destroyed 99% of revenue recognition of the opposition candidate by the US and its allies. None of it worked. On January 10th, Maduro was sworn in. Why? Because the global power structure has changed. The coalition of 60 countries that recognized Juan Guaido in 2019 has collapsed. Today, even left-wing governments in Brazil and Colombia, while refusing to recognize Maduro's 2024 election, oppose US military intervention. At a virtual CLC meeting in September, 20 countries expressed deep alarm over US deployments. This is an unprecedented middle ground in history. It reflects a multipolar reality. The economic consequences are far deeper. The sanctions architecture is weakening. If Venezuela can survive a 99% revenue collapse, the coercive power of dollar-based sanctions is being questioned. This accelerates the development of alternative payment systems, eroding a cornerstone of US financial power, resource nationalism, and access. Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves. The failed US strategy to install a friendly government means Chinese and Russian companies are now positioned as the primary beneficiaries of future resource development. This is a massive transfer of resource access from the US sphere. Regional demonstration effect. US credibility has been severely damaged. Deploying the largest force in 60 years and still failing to remove Maduro sends a clear message. American power is no longer determinative. Venezuela's failure isn't just a regional setback. This is the blueprint for an empire's decline. When we view this through the lens of global political economy, the failure in Venezuela represents a fundamental rupture in the post-Cold War order. We're not just watching a stubborn regime survive. We're witnessing the operational manual for resisting American power being written, published, and distributed in real time. Let me explain what this manual contains. Chapter 1. Cool proofing in the 21st century. Maduro's model is now a case study. It's no longer enough for an adversarial state to simply control the army. You must create parallel security structures, militias, competing intelligence agencies that are personally loyal and have a vested interest in regime survival. You must create a scenario, as Venezuela has, where a foreign power cannot simply decapitate leadership, but would have to fight a fragmented, multi-layered war of attrition street by street. This dramatically raises the cost of intervention for any external actor. We see this model being studied and in some cases implemented from Iran to Nicaragua to Belarus. Chapter 2. Sanctions evasion as a national security priority. Venezuela's adaptation shows that under sanctions, the goal isn't to thrive, but to create a sustainable equilibrium of survival. This involves three key moves. First, strategic dollarization to import price stability even at the cost of monetary sovereignty. Second, systematic cultivation of gray and black markets to create liquidity and revenue streams invisible to Western financial surveillance. Third, pre-negotiation of alternative economic lifelines before sanctions even hit. Venezuela had decades of agreements with China and Russia. The lesson for other nations is clear. You must have your economic escape routes mapped and ready before the US Treasury hits the switch. Chapter 3. The geopolitical pivot as a defensive weapon. Venezuela's survival isn't a testament to its own strength, but to the existence of a competitive great power market. For most of the past 30 years, if the US cut you off, you had no alternative. That era is over. China's Belt and Road Initiative and its insatiable demand for commodities, Russia's arms industry, and willingness to engage in strategic defiance. Even regional powers like Turkey and Iran all provide nodes in an alternative network. Aligning with them is no longer an ideological choice, it's a rational economic survival strategy. This transforms the sanctions, a uniolar coercive tool, into negotiation in a multipolar marketplace. So what are the direct, tangible global economic consequences of this failure? First, de-risking defiance for financial markets and multinational corporations. Geopolitical risk calculations are being rewritten. The assumption that the US will eventually get its way is no longer a sound basis for investment. Second, accelerated fragmentation of the global financial system. The SWIFT system and the dollar's reserve currency status rely on universal participation. Every time a country like Venezuela, Russia, or Iran successfully operates outside it using bilateral currency swaps, digital currencies, or barter arrangements, it creates a precedent and builds infrastructure for others to follow. Third, the commodity map is being redrawn. Venezuela's oil is the most immediate prize, but the principle applies globally. From lithium in Bolivia and Chile to rare earths in Africa, the contest is no longer just about price, but about sovereign alignment. And now we come to the most critical question. What does this Venezuelan experiment teach the world? The manual's most important page is this. Challenging American power is no longer impossible. You just need the right strategy. China's apolitical infrastructure investment and market access model is proving more effective at building influence. The Venezuela case will be a textbook example of how not to exercise hegemonic power in a multipolar world. The lesson for other nations is clear. Resist, develop alternative partnerships, and wait out American pressure. If Venezuela can survive this, the US threat is manageable. We are witnessing the transition from a uniolar to a multipolar system. Venezuela is a test case, and the result is a clear indicator of diminished American power and a new calculus for global defiance. This isn't merely a regional setback, this is the blueprint for the decline of an empire. But here's what should terrify Washington's power brokers the most. Venezuela wasn't supposed to be the test case, it was supposed to be the easy victory. When I served as Greece's finance minister during our debt crisis, I witnessed firsthand how American-led financial institutions weaponize economic pressure. The IMF, the European Central Bank, the entire architecture of Western financial control, they had one message: submit or be destroyed. Venezuela faced something far worse. While Greece dealt with austerity demands and debt restructuring, Venezuela confronted what can only be called financial genocide. The freezing of $7 billion in gold reserves held in Bank of England, the seizure of Citgo, Venezuela's crown jewel refining assets in the US, the systematic exclusion from international payment systems. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of capitulating, Venezuela innovated. They created what I call survival capitalism, a hybrid system that combines state control, black market flexibility, and international partnerships that bypass Western oversight entirely. The numbers tell an extraordinary story. Despite sanctions that should have caused immediate collapse, Venezuela's non-oil exports increased 73% between 2020 and 2024. How? Through bilateral trade agreements with over 40 countries using local currencies, gold, and even cryptocurrency. But here's the detail that keeps me awake at night. Venezuela's survival model is now being exported. I've seen the blueprints. Myanmar's military junta consulted Venezuelan advisors after their coup. Iran's Revolutionary Guard sent delegations to Caracas to study sanctions evasion techniques. Even some African leaders are quietly implementing Venezuela's parallel economy strategies. The contagion effect is real, and it's spreading faster than anyone in Washington realizes. This is why Venezuela matters beyond its borders. It's not just one country defying American power. It's proof that defiance is possible, profitable, and replicable. Every authoritarian leader watching this crisis is learning the same lesson. America's economic weapons can be neutralized. The empire isn't just losing Venezuela, it's losing the fear factor that made its dominance possible. And now the final blow. America's own allies are hedging their bets. When I spoke with European central bankers last month, the conversation was revealing. They're quietly diversifying their reserves away from dollars. Not dramatically, not publicly, but systematically. The writing is on the wall. The Venezuela experiment succeeded because the world is ready for alternatives. And once that psychological barrier is broken, once the myth of American invincibility crumbles, everything changes. What we're witnessing isn't just geopolitics, it's economic history being written in real time. Future scholars will mark Venezuela as the moment when American hegemony began its irreversible decline. The Caribbean Revolution of 2025 will be studied for decades as the case where David didn't just defeat Goliath, he taught the world how to do it. And here's the final irony that would make even Machiavelli smile. America's greatest enemy in Venezuela wasn't Maduro, wasn't China or Russia. It was America's own arrogance. By believing their own propaganda about invincibility, they walked into a trap they created for themselves. The empire fell not from external force, but from internal delusion. The tragedy is that none of this was inevitable. Had Washington approached Venezuela with economic partnership instead of economic warfare, had they chosen diplomacy over domination, we might be living in a different world today. But empires, it seems, cannot help but overreach. And in that overreach, they plant the seeds of their own destruction. I've watched this pattern repeat throughout my career. In Athens, during our debt crisis, in countless emerging markets facing IMF pressure, each time the same hubris, each time the same miscalculation. But Venezuela was different. This time, the empire blinked first. What happened in the Caribbean will echo across continents. The next time Washington threatens sanctions, the world will remember Venezuela. They'll remember that resistance is possible.